Hi everyone, and welcome to one of our last weeks of lecture. We are almost done. We are so close. So I hope that is exciting for you to be done. It's obviously been a long semester for you. I understand. So this week last week we talked about rhetoric, and we had to do that first because we really had to talk about language and all of the things that language means and all the different ways we look at language and persuasion and what language is saying, whether it's through logic, emotion, the person who's saying it. So we went through kind of this history of rhetoric and language and persuasion. And now we are going to go ahead and take a look at the critical paradigm, which basically, after we kind of analyze the language that's going on, then we kind of say, okay, we've looked at all this. Now, how do we critically analyze what this is saying about the broader society and our values, power differences, and our ideals? So the critical can kind of overlay a lot of rhetorical analysis. What is this artifact and the language in it really saying about what we value and what especially power dominance relationships are in process in our lives? So it gets a little more philosophical, a little more social justice oriented. Let me remind you about this bad boy right here. This is what it looks like in case, you've lost it. We are now in chapter 16. And again, I think the rhetoric chapter, chapter 15 and chapter 16, are both really good chapters, and I followed them pretty closely. So I'm going to introduce you today to critical studies, or this critical paradigm. So after we usually analyze an artifact, we have to kind of say, why did we analyze that? What was the greater purpose? Great, it's persuasive, but what does it mean on a broader context? So critical scholars use textual analysis, rhetoric, to reveal power dominance relationships, describe consciousness or lack thereof, and to pick hegemonic processes at work. What does this mean? It's really all about social justice and broader ideals. So we can look at a speech and say, wow, look at the power differences that were revealed. Or are we being conscious of Black Lives Matter? That's a very particular phrase rhetorically. What does it mean? And how does that fit into the critical paradigm of our world and what we value? Depict hegemonic processes, things again where we see power or domination of another set of ideas. So you see hegemony defined right below that. A lot of people will say the United States is very hegemonic. We believe everyone should believe the way we do. and that's not necessarily the critical perspective. We actually want to look out for hegemonic processes and see where we are being too narrow-minded or not open enough to look at another set of ideas. So hegemony is the process of domination in which one set of ideas subverts or co-opts another. And that happens quite a bit, particularly in the US, when we wanted to introduce democracy to the rest of the world. A lot of people said we were being hegemonic and just, inserting our way of living on other cultures. And that's, again, not necessarily the right thing to be doing at all. We also look at ideologies, or what I even like to say are values, a set of ideas that structures a group's reality. And that's values. What structures your reality in and out? We've got actually very interesting things going on right now. We have rhetoric from our government saying stay home, don't go out. And now, right now, across the US, there was one this weekend, even in San Diego, we've got groups of people going out and protesting and saying, get businesses back open. This is ridiculous. And it's interesting because they're carrying symbols and artifacts. One of the protests that recently took place had a Confederate flag in it, and they're talking about freedom. And certainly, I looked at, there is the perspective that some people are saying they would rather die then leave their children a bad economy, so we should reopen. And of course, the other side says we should stay home because we value everyone's life, not just your life, but I'm going to stay home because I don't want to infect other people, even if it hurts me. And then the other side is saying, I don't care if it hurts me or I die, but I'm going to go out and do what I need to do. So we have these ideologies that structure the way we think, the way we believe, these values that really construct who we are and how we think. This came out, you can see the date on here, 2017. And I thought it was a wonderful example of rhetoric. So when we talk about rhetoric, we're going to look at the message that's being played. And if I were a critical scholar, I would analyze this video about what it says about what we value in our culture over life or helping others. So I hope you enjoy it. I think it's got a powerful message about what social media is doing to us, or what's more important.
Huh? Ha!
Okay, so this was something I enjoyed. Obviously, we might have different ideologies, but I thought it was fabulous. I would love to do a rhetorical and critical critique of how we get likes. And obviously, you know, here we have her basically exposing the suffering of someone else, not because she's actually helping, but for her own gain. So that's what I mean when we talk about an artifact. That video I just showed you is an artifact, and we can analyze that and actually critically look at it and what it's saying about culture and ideology and power structures, etc. in society. So as we move on, there are some, whoops, that did not go the right way. Sorry about that. Some days are easier than others with this thing. There we go. Okay. As we move through critical studies, there are certain critical studies that are common that we still use today to analyze things. They haven't changed. And one of the first criticisms that we're going to look at that we analyze things by is a Marxist criticism. Many of you may have heard this term before. It is a socioeconomic structuralism theory. Basically, a Marxist criticism talks about society and the imbalance in financial, socioeconomic situations across the world. It says that basically the working class groups are inherently oppressed in capitalist societies, and that we should have much more of a balance and equity. In order for the imbalance to be reformed, the social structure itself has to be changed from capitalism to socialism. It's probably impossible to do this, but certainly the theory is there that there should be more equity. And kind of funny that this we were just talking about this morning in my house, and I showed this video that shows inequity. Real quick, I'll go ahead and pull that up and show you that one as well, because basically this is like a Marxist criticism about the imbalance, doing
Let's read them.
equal work for equal pay. And you may have seen this before, but it's certainly, again, a very interesting way to look at
So
it.
a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group, they know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, it's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again a cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
So the whole TED Talk is very interesting, and I think you can quickly see that, of course, this is basically what is being said in a Marxist criticism. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of different things in society that we use to look at that. You're actually going to be, for your assignment, reading an article. I'm giving you an answer, so listen, an article that is based off of basically a Marxist criticism that this particular TV show promotes inequity. In other words, we think we're helping, but we're actually further promoting inequity instead of helping. So that is the notion behind the Marxist criticism, and it's talked about in chapter 16 in more detail. Again, I think it's impossible to eliminate or change to a total socialist society. That was obviously the idea behind communism. Probably the closest it has come to working for countries on a global scale would be the far northern parts of Europe, Sweden, Norway, Finland. Some of these countries run on a very socialist structure where equity is across the board. I've even had students who come from Sweden, and they don't even recognize that they should have to call me doctor. They don't understand why we have so much hierarchy in our system, because they are raised in such a way that is much, much more equal. Now, the rhetoric part really also comes in terms of dominant language. And we're actually witnessing historic changes in our language right now for the very purposes of equity and how we define ourselves. So certainly, even saying, or some would argue, he or she defines, perpetuates, or oppresses folks by the very pronouns that we use. And there are other words in our language that certainly define and perpetuate these inequities alone. And it's funny, I'll often, when I teach intercultural, I'll hear people say, well, those people over there, like I am not part of the human race. Those people are something different. And just our very own language can actually make this dominant structure inherent in what we're saying and oppress people. So the next type of criticism that is talked about, of course, is feminist criticism. And this really looks at women in a patriarchal society as seeing that we are dictated by the privileged position of males over females in education, medicine, religion, work, and all aspects of daily life. Unfortunately, absolutely true, in my opinion. So, and in a lot of others, there actually is a survey, the Global Economic Survey, the one that just came out recently, I have, and it looked at the status of women across the world and how we're doing in terms of equity to males. I think that it makes perfect sense that there is a gendered nation of institutional structures, and certainly women are excluded from some of those. We've heard stories recently, or it was in the newspaper, of an engineering firm that put their picture, they needed a picture for a story they were doing, and it was all men. And then they photoshopped in some women. And I'm not sure if we did this one already, but it's kind of a fun one. So I'll do this with you real quick. If you are in Google, to Google images. So there's a couple that are interesting. If you do professor and we go to, not news, I'm so sorry, images, what do we mostly see right here? What are the first images that come up? These are all white males. I don't even want to like scroll down because somehow we've got a white male child in here before we put a female. Now there's one. We got a female. We're still seeing old white men when I type in the word professor. What if I put in the word teacher? Here we go. Where are the men? Where are the men? Immediately, I had the first, 8 pictures that come up are women. Here now we have one male, and certainly this is interesting. We get this guy looks more like a college professor, but watch me playing into the stereotypes. It's also kind of like if you do, and I encourage you, go ahead and play around with this, construction worker. What do you think we're going to see? Oh, I bet you did not guess that it was going to be men. Now, this little graphic down here does have a female, and for the most part, yes, it is males. I haven't done this since my son, but he always tells me there's no women in my field. How am I supposed to meet anyone? There's no women in auto mechanic. Let's see. Oop, I spelt that wrong, but hopefully... And boy, is he right? All we get are, oh, is that a female over there? Could be, but mostly we're getting males, and even a particular type of looking male, I think, in these images. And there's other things you could probably Google up. I think nurse actually gets pretty equal these days. Call me a fool again. Mostly I put in nurse, we see women. We do have male nurses, a lot of them quite frequently, but we're still seeing a lot of women here. So there you go. Feminist criticism right there based on pictures off of Google. Are pictures on Google an artifact? Absolutely. And even though there's no language, this is what we call visual rhetoric. And we look at these visuals and clearly we see a difference in jobs. And we also know that women still make only a percentage of what men do. I'll show you real quickly as well, if it doesn't take me too long to find, if I can find it in just 2 clicks, I'll show it to you. Sometimes it takes me more than 2 clicks, and then I don't want to waste time. But the report that I was mentioning is right here, and it's a fascinating report. And it is not, it's from the World Economic Forum. It's 2008, and it's the Global Gender Gap Report. And this basically, again, looks at the equity of men to women in 4 different areas: politics, the job market, business, so business, politics, health, and education. And where is the most equal place? Oops, I think did I scroll past that one already? I just wanted to get to the big graph, and it's in the middle, and it breaks down where every country is on those 4 measures. And a lot of people think that the US would be a lot higher than we are, and we are not, is what I can tell you. So I should just pull this graph out as a separate data piece, because I do use it quite often, and the report, whoopsie, is kind of lengthy. Ooh, are we going through every single country now? It looks like we are. Belgium. Maybe I already passed the whole graph, and I just... All right, I'll stop because I don't want to waste time, but I did want to show it to you if I could find it. We are quite a bit of a ways down. Again, mostly you're going to see your Northern European countries at the top in terms of equity across those 4 areas. They analyze everything. It's really quite a fascinating document. If I find the whole graph, I will put it up for you, again, because it is quite astounding how far behind we are. All right, back to feminist criticism then, because I can't find that, but that's the report if you are interested in it. Okay, so here, gendered nations, we look at institutions that are particularly exclusionary of gender. It criticizes the status quo, and usually it is inherently a political battle women face. And I've had a lot of people do critiques on feminist criticism before. I looked at bathrooms. Go with me here for just a minute, in China, and I was fascinated by the symbol for the man and symbol for the woman. And some people could do a critical study of the fact, again, that we have male and female bathrooms. That is a battle right now. If we're equal, we can just all go together. They had the symbol for the female bathroom at the one place I was in China was a high heel, and the symbol for the male bathroom was a pipe. And I just found that very interesting, and would have loved to have done like a little critical critique of the imbalance between the two. All right. So our third criticism is cultural criticism. And this one looks at the struggle among dominant culture ideologies. And certainly when we look to different cultures, they have different ways of doing things and different beliefs. And we criticize them for doing that. And we get into power struggles. And I was mentioning that at the beginning. One of the reasons, I might have shared this in another video, that I went to India was because it was so different, and particularly the idea of arranged marriages. And some of you are sitting there going, no way. And that's kind of one of the reasons I went, because I really wanted to see what that was all about. And honestly, there is this cultural issue, and part of the cultural issue ties back into socioeconomic status and the caste system, and why they do what they do. There are very, very, very good reasons, and the system works. However, this culture is also still stuck again in structural challenges, the caste system, uneven and unfair balance of power, and political issues and corruptions. So when we look at culture and we are criticized for some of the cultural struggles that are out there, or we pull at what we call ethnocentrism, a belief that our own culture is superior in what they do, again, we start to see this struggle between cultures, just like we did between the socioeconomic status of people, the gendered status of people, the cultural status of people comes into critical analysis as well. And the last one we take a look at is um, this one is interesting. You are, believe it or not, a postmodern generation. You are postmodern and you believe that all truth is relative. And it's kind of funny because you're like, what does that mean? It means your favorite phrase is "it depends." And I think it's a very interesting state we're in. It's kind of the state we started this course in, where I said, how do you know what is true? And most of us would say we don't anymore. It just all depends on what you want to believe. And I have such a hard time swallowing that pill because I think there is a greater society. And as a society, we, have to take a look at that and say maybe there is a way we as the world should act. Maybe there are some ways we find truth and that truth can be absolute. I mean, that's this whole coronavirus thing. You could look at the rhetoric behind coronavirus and apply the postmodern criticism that nobody believes science, nobody knows what is true, there is no rational or correct view. Everything is relative to what I want to go do. So I'm going to go outside and hang out with people and do whatever I want. And if it infects other people, so be it. And that's kind of, again, the flip side for me here is I want to go out. I want to do things, but it's not about me. It's about infecting other people that potentially might be out. I mean, even if I'm not worried about getting infected and I do get infected, I can then infect other people. So what responsibility, if any, do I have to the other people? And postmodernism, would probably say, you don't. It's all relative. Again, we're questioning that. And we do live in this postmodern society, and we have discourse that basically tells us there's no truth. So Foucault is the major kind of writer about postmodernism, and he says it's impossible to separate what we know from the language forms we use to think about and express that knowledge. And I think what he is saying is it's in our language, in the rhetoric we use. We cannot seem to listen to something on the news and separate that language from what we think we might know. Our language, basically, we're using what we call the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Our language is our perception of reality. Whatever language we're using to talk about things is our reality. It used to really bug me when people would say, well, that's just your perception. And I would say, but your perception is your reality. If I perceive it that way, I'm telling you what I believe to be true. So when you tell someone, oh, that's just your perception, you're basically saying you're full of, and I don't agree with you. That's what you're saying. Our language shapes inherently how we think. I mean, try to think of something without putting a word to it. You can't. You cannot. Words define how you think and how we express ourselves. So, that is actually the end of the critical paradigm, which means there's just the one video for this week because that was it. This is some deep stuff, though, and looks again at a lot of power struggles and dominance and values and ideals in a global scale. So I encourage you to take a look at both chapters 15 and 16 this week. What I'm going to do on Wednesday is I'm going to put up a short video about your assignment. So what you're going to be doing, and I'll get you prepared for this, obviously, is you are going to read one of our professors in our department, an article he wrote, basically analyzing a television show. And he does a Do you remember what kind of criticism he does? Because I already told you. Psh, this one here. He does a Marxist criticism about this TV show and the ideals and ideology it's promoting. And you'll all know the TV show, so I think you'll have fun reading the article. And there will be some questions regarding rhetoric as well as critical analysis of this article. So I'll talk a little bit more about that on Wednesday and post that on Wednesday. And that is your week for now. I'll have some clicker questions for you. Make sure you answer those before class time on Wednesday. All right, everyone. Again, stay healthy, stay safe, think about the global impacts of going out, and hopefully we will all be able to do that soon, very soon, safely.